which sometimes I encourage people to.
Do people have to go to court? Because it's supposed to be normal. It's supposed to be after a crash, compensation. That's how it's supposed to work.
Yes, but then that doesn't eliminate the jurisdiction of the court. For instance, what the law says is that it creates a limit of liability. In Nigeria, for instance, the limit of liability is $100,000. Now, a victim of an accident might look at this and say, you know what, I'm not satisfied with the limit of the liability. And the law allows you that. The law says that if you can establish that the accident occurred on account of willful conduct or a level of negligence that is egregious, then you can present your case to a court. And a court can say, considering the facts in this case, I do not agree that there should be a limit to liability. I'm going to award damages or compensation in excess of what the contractual liability limits are. So you have people who are going to say, I'm not interested in this 100,000. I think the nature of the liability is far in excess of $500,000. And so they'll go to court to establish that. So it's not that people need to go to court to enforce what is a contractual insurance agreement. It's usually people go to court when it's pretty clear to them that they will not be satisfied with what the insurance seeks to pay.
For ground victims, for instance, like the last Dana crash, one of the victims who claimed that his source of income was, ruined, does he not have a claim? Because he's still in court.
Absolutely. Their claims are even completely different. It's a typical court claim. I've suffered injury. It was your operation or your conduct that resulted in that injury. So you're liable to me to the extent of that injury. And so they don't even have a liability limit. They don't have a contractual understanding with the airline because there's no contract of carriage. They're not passengers. And so there's no liability limit. And I suppose that also is obviously a very contentious area where the question is, look, what is the real value of your loss?
Now, I know that the EU legislation of 1997 has air carriers liability in respect of passengers and their baggages, compensation in event of death or injury. Now, no financial limit is set as regards to first tier of strict carrier liability. Now, do we have such laws in Nigeria that a victim can hold on to, especially if he has to go to court?
The Civil Aviation Act has adopted the Montreal Convention, and that is why the local legislation is very clear that the agreed limit of liability is $100,000 for bodily injury or death in the event of an air accident. And I mean, each country has different laws about liability limits, but there are conventions which are recommendations. Some people adopt it, some people don't. For instance, in the United States, they've gone far beyond the Montreal Convention, but the Civil Aviation Act in Nigeria adopts that Montreal Convention, and that's why the limit, with some difference, instead of 100,000 special drawing rights, we have adopted a clear figure, which is $100,000.
Airline Operators of Nigeria, that's the umbrella body for domestic airlines, has kicked against the proposal by the federal government to amend the Civil Aviation Act of 2006 on the grounds that it's inferior to the existing one. What's your take on that?
Well, I'm not sure what exactly the dispute is, but I know for sure that legislation generally, periodically, requires review. So, I mean, there's no question about that. And one of the challenges we experience in Nigeria, really sometimes, is that some of the legislations are pretty old. Some pieces of our legislation are old. Sometimes it's a question of enforcement. For instance, there are fines that are created by the Civil Aviation Act of 2006. I think that those fines have far been overtaken by events, which is typical. I mean, if for instance there's conduct that says that the fine is 1,000 naira, that's not a deterrent to engaging in that conduct repeatedly. And so that's obviously a sufficient basis to revise that law. Secondly, I know that at the time the Civil Aviation Authority was set up, and at the time Nigeria sought to be to be classified as a category, US FAA Category 1 airport, the question of the totality of the coverage of regulations by the Civil Aviation Authority arose, because we had other laws. We had the laws that created the Federal Airports Authority. We had the laws that created the Nigerian Airspace Management Agency, which to some extent suggested that each of these organizations were regulators. And so to qualify for CAT 1, we needed to clearly demonstrate that only one regulator existed in the industry. And so there had to be some exchanges between the executive in Nigeria and the executive in the United States, making commitments and providing comfort that all the regulatory roles that were domiciled in those other organizations will be transferred to the NCAA. Now, if you're saying that you want to amend the law now to capture all of that, that's absolutely a good reason to amend the law. As a matter of fact, I think it's an important reason to amend the law.
The aviation industry has so many issues, but from your standpoint, what do you think we can do to get the industry to where it's supposed to be internationally?
What I know, I don't think we're behind internationally. I've spoken with some of the people I respect the most in this industry, and I recognize that, yes. But what can we do to get better, if that's the question? Enforcement. And it is the case all over the world. They're trying to enforce better, so we have to try and enforce better. For me, I think the impunity that we suffer as a country, the aviation industry is not immunized or insulated from it. We've got to enforce. People have to live by the law. There have to be serious consequences for violating the law, and those consequences must come down every single time. That is the greatest deterrent. For instance, if you recognize that not only, if you fly an aircraft where you have warning bells saying do not operate, even if you fly that aircraft safely, there is a serious consequences that will preclude you from ever getting on the flight deck of another aircraft for the rest of your life. You are likely to be more circumspect in whether you fly that aircraft or not. And just doing that alone means that people are safe, or at least are safer. So for me, it's enforcement.
So according to the guest on today's program, our laws are internationally acceptable. However, the enforcement of these laws and regulations is some of the major challenges we face. To maintain high standard of safety and services, the enforcement of these laws must be a priority. And that's where we draw the curtain on today's program. Thank you so much for staying with me. My name is Victoria Idowu. If you missed any part of the program, you can find it on our website. It's channelstv.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Victoria Idowu. Have a safe week.
At first, it's only anticipation that something is about to happen. This is one thing that makes life interesting. To compete not only with players across the field, but across the world. It makes me feel joy when we win and sorrow when we lose. The action and reaction, colliding, falling, dropping, despite the odds. I love it because it brings me tears of victory, tears of joy. The skill that leads to the pass that leads to the shot that leads to the goal that determines the ultimate. Channel Sports, defining the moment of true sports.
Indomitable. I am indomitable. I am indomitable.
You You are the Indomitable generation, and this Indomitables pack is for you.